welcome to the last WASP meeting of this municipal year. There are apologies for absence from Councillors Dennis and
McDonald.
I'm so sorry, Councillor McDonald, thank you very much. And as reserves, we have Councillor Soames and Councillor Kerslake. Thank you very much for attending.
We've also got apologies from co-opted member Martin Bracknell.
Martin Bracknell, thank you very much. Apologies again for the absence of minutes. The minutes are not with us due to an admin issue. We will take the minutes at the opening meeting of OSC in the next municipal year. There are no items that I deem urgent. Are there any disclosures of interest or dispensations from anyone? No. Awesome. Okay, we'll begin this evening with our first Cabinet Member interview, and that's the Deputy Leader for the Council and Cabinet Member for Culture, Councillor Rebecca Lury. Hello, Rebecca. If you could begin with a very brief overview of your portfolio, then I will open up the questions, then I will hand over to the Vice Chair and she will ask you other questions, and then I will open it up to the rest of the committee. Hopefully we'll be done within the hour. So, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I thought I should give you a bit of an update because obviously, as you will know, my portfolio covers a huge range of different things across a number of departments. So I thought I'd run through quickly some of the main things that have been going on over the past year, but obviously if you want to ask me questions about other bits of my portfolio, please do. So if I start with free theatre tickets for primary school children, which is obviously one of our main manifesto commitments and a key part of the council plan, to ensure that every primary school child had a free visit to the theatre every year. We agreed as a cabinet in March that the work will go ahead to deliver on this project, and we've committed £500,000 over the next 3 years to enable us to do that piece of work. So that's delivering a free theatre visit for the just over 20,000 primary school children that we have in the borough. And what we're looking to do is set up a central platform that will help us to coordinate all of the theatres across Southwark and a wider group of theatres that we want to be involved in the project to help ensure that we can get children to the theatre every single year. The second commitment that we were really keen to make sure happened in the first year was around free swimming lessons for Southwark residents. And what we are looking to do is to start a pilot programme from September this year, which will target a number of key groups and look to roll out a 12-week programme for them to learn how to swim. This is specifically aimed at people who have never swum before and is aimed to complement the programmes that go on in our schools already teaching children how to swim. In terms of our libraries, we've obviously committed to ensuring that our libraries are open when our residents need them, and we published our library and heritage strategy in January this year, which looked at what the future of our library provision should be. So it shouldn't just be about books, it should be about workspace, it should be about community events, it should be about all the other things that we want to do in our libraries going forward, and also particularly looking at heritage. And a key part of that was about announcing our new library on the Walworth Road, which will be a library and heritage centre, which we're in the planning phase for now, which we hope to have open at the end of this year. We obviously also opened Grovevale Library in East Dulwich earlier this year as well. And as you will all know, in the budget this year we have a commitment for £1 million over the next 4 years from the London Devolution Deal money and our business rates pooling to ensure that we can maintain the current hours that we have across our library sites. In terms of our events in our parks, so we had the ambition that our events team would be self-financing, and we have come close this year to being able to bring in the right amount of money, along with a few other things other than specifically just events that mean that that team is self-financing. And we are currently conducting a review that has a public consultation that is open for people to comment on the way in which our events programme works. Obviously, Gala and Alice in Winterland were the first two large-scale events that we have done in our parks. to try and generate the income that we needed. Obviously, we are really committed to our parks, and we have the most number of green flags that we have ever had. And we have also opened both Peckham Rye Playground and Leighton Square Playground in the last year. We've also managed to get a commitment for an extra £500,000 for adventure playgrounds, and we've also opened the Mint Street Adventure Playground as well. There is a big piece of work going on the football pitches at both Burgess and Brimington Park, which has some initial money that has been agreed by the council, and we're doing some further work to try and get that match funded by the football foundations, so that we can make sure that that investment is delivering everything that it can for the community. And obviously the most controversial part of what we have been doing is looking at car parking charges in our parks, which there is a consultation open at the moment, and that will be across our 5 key parks with car parks, so Burgess Park, Bel Air, Dulwich, Honor Oak, Peckham Rye and Southwark Park. On the other side of my portfolio, the things probably usefully to touch on are the principles for consultation and engagement. So one of the things that I talked about when I first got elected was how there is a great sense of frustration about the way in which we do consultation and engagement as a council. And I've been working hard with the officer team to try and set out a set of principles that the council can adopt, which we can then hold ourselves to account on to enable us to deliver effective consultation and engagement, and that will be going to Cabinet later this month. We published our faith strategy earlier this year, which talks about our agreed ambitions for working together with our faith communities, recognises the huge amount of work that they already do in our community and how we can make that relationship stronger and better. And then we have also recently launched our Common Purpose Grants Programme funding, so we've allocated over £800,000 to projects across the borough, and I know I've been in touch with every ward individually to let you know which projects have been funded, and also sent around a nice interactive map which shows you where they are across the whole of the borough. I sent it to you, but I can resend it to you. It was a couple of months ago, and I sent the map about a month ago as well. I can double check, if there were any in your ward, you will have had an email about it. I sent one to every single ward that had any Common Purpose grant funding. And then the final thing to probably mention is obviously community councils, which we're in the process of looking at what that new structure will look like post the boundary review, which has slightly disrupted our boundaries for community councils, which we are still in discussions about and will be looking to roll out from the new year if it is agreed by the whole of the council.
Cool, thank you very much. I've got 3 questions, and they all touch on what you've already spoken about.
Yeah.
The faith strategy. Premises, parking and planning were the top 3 challenges relating to council activities cited by faith groups when consulted for this strategy. How do you think this strategy will tackle those issues?
Do you want to do them all at once?
Yeah, please. And then council parking charges in parks, particularly relating to Honor Oak Recreation Ground. Is it expected to have an impact on those travelling to the Honor Oak Crematorium or to Camberwell New Cemetery? Mm-hmm. And the outdoor events policy, which you also touched on, what parts of or issues with the 2017 outdoor events policy prompted the ongoing review of the outdoor events policy and location-specific conditions?
Okay, I will do those in order for you. So in terms of the faith strategy, what we set out in the initial strategy that went to Cabinet was our kind of high-level idea of what we talked about with the faith communities about how we want to work together. That's the very beginning of the work that we're doing, and what we are now going to do is hold an event later in the year, probably around September time, where we're going to bring the faith community together in essentially a conference to talk about exactly those key issues that you've mentioned, so things like parking in premises, and speak exactly about how we tackle some of those things going forward. I know it's a particular concern for ward councillors, especially in terms of the balance between residents who live near faith centres and the faith centres to be able to get their congregations to those areas, and we want to make sure that those relationships are much better than they currently are in a number of places across the borough. In terms of your second question, there will be no impact on people who are going to crematoria for funerals in any way, because you can park on the current sites. And then obviously in terms of the wider car parking, the consultation is going on at the moment, and we're aware of a whole number of issues from people who are dog walkers, people who use our parks for health reasons, and people who want to use our parks to visit cemeteries, and we're going to look at everything that comes back as part of that consultation to understand how we might need to tweak that policy to allow those groups to still be able to use the parking facilities when they need them. And then more broadly, in terms of events policy overall, so I took over as cabinet member when there had already been agreement for both Gala and for Alice and Winterland that was decided by a previous cabinet member, and following consultation with all of the ward councillors that had been involved in both of those events, and seeing the events actually happen and speaking to local community groups and people who were directly involved in it, I thought it would be a useful exercise for us to review the way in which they have worked and the way in which we need to improve things going forward. I think there are a number of sites that are underused. We regularly hear that Burgess Park has poor transport links, which for anyone who knows where Burgess Park is ridiculous, because every bus in the world goes to Burgess Park. And we need to be clearer about encouraging people to use that site for events and talking to them about what type of events are suitable to have in other parks, like Southwark Park, where you need to be very aware that there are a large number of residents nearby. So what I'm hoping that we can do is have a review of what went well and what went not so well with the events that we had, and how we can therefore tweak our policy going forward to make sure that we're delivering events that specifically also benefit Southwark residents. So I'm really keen that Southwark businesses are the people that provide the food and drink on site, and I'm really keen that the employees are all Southwark residents as well, and that then the people who are most affected by an event happening are the people that benefit most from the event happening in the first place.
Cool. I'm going to take Chair's liberty in asking a follow-up question, and it's around the events policy, and it concerns Southwark Park and us in Winterland, because I'm one of those councillors that whose ward it was in. What reviews happened with us and the event organisers, if any, and what was the kind of like sum total of that, and where will we go with events like that in the future?
So it's probably useful to start actually with the Gala event that we did in Peckham Rye Park. So we carried out a full review after that in partnership with Gala and published a public report that set out where there were learnings for us, how well they thought the event went, how well we thought the event went. We're attempting to go through the same process with Alice and Winterland. We have done the council's side of the process and are waiting for the Alice and Winterland organisers to get back to us with further information. If they don't, we'll just publish the council's review of it.
Cool.
So I'll be able to get back to you in due course.
That'd be brilliant. If that could come back next year, that'd be excellent. Maria.
Thank you, Chair. Good to have you with us, Rebecca. I had dozens of questions to ask you, but unfortunately, if I ask all the questions, we will be here all night. So, as you said, you had a massive portfolio responsibility. Surely it is too big a task for one cabinet member to service adequately? For instance, how many hours per week are you able to commit to the management of this huge portfolio workload on top of being deputy leader?
Do you want to ask all your questions?
I can ask you the next question. On the same subject, how many voluntary community sector organizations, faith communities, past, cultural communities, vulnerable groups, etc., are there? And how many have you managed to meet with?
So if I do those two first, on the second one, there are hundreds and hundreds of voluntary community sector groups across the borough, and I think it would probably be beyond anybody's ability to be able to meet with them all. I meet with as many as I can. I will go out and meet them. Plenty come to us and meet them. I'm invited to lots of events and go and speak with them. People have made representations to me as part of grant funding programmes that we've had, and if there are organisations who want to meet with me, I'm always more than happy to do so. You're right that this is a large portfolio, but I think that's true of all of the portfolios across the cabinet, and I think mine just has maybe lots of smaller sections to it than some of the other portfolios, but that doesn't mean that it necessarily takes up any more time than anyone else's. I probably can't give you an average amount of hours a week. I would spend a number of hours every day, and my weekends replying to emails or going to events or drafting reports as is required, and I would do all of the work that is required to do the role.
Just sorry to be pedantic, but I know that there are hundreds and thousands of voluntary bodies, from which I am one as well, but in any case, how many do you think you have been able to meet in these 9 months?
I probably, I don't know, even know vaguely how many I've met with. I'm not sure that I can find out, but I can have a look at my diary and try and find a number for you, but I'm not sure plucking a number out of the air is going to be the best way for me to do it right now. But I can get back to you and let you know.
Please.
Yeah,
Thank you, Rebecca.
that's fine.
Okay, Tom.
So you touched on libraries and the so we're very proud as a borough to be opening libraries and not turning them into bizarre hybrid libraries like some boroughs near us. But has that someone who represents the border areas? But I was just wondering whether there's any way of quantifying the quality of libraries, specifically whether it's user satisfaction or if there's any kind of review process for them, just so that we know that whilst we're keeping those libraries open, we're also keeping the quality high at the same time.
So as part of our library and heritage strategy, we went out to people to ask them about their local libraries, their satisfaction with libraries, and the way, what else they wanted to see as part of their libraries going forward. And obviously what came through was the themes that we've then put into the strategy. So actually one of the key things that came through is that people are really, really keen that there is workspace in libraries, not even just for young people, it's actually for children who don't have the space in their homes to be able to concentrate and really, really want to be able to go and use our libraries going forward. But I think some of the best data that we have to show how brilliant our libraries are is that we have the #1 borrowing figures for the whole of London in our libraries. And we have the 3rd highest number of visits across all our libraries, and Canada Water Library is obviously top of that list as well. So our libraries are really, really well used, and that's, those numbers don't take into account some of our newer libraries that we brought on stream, or the fact that Newington Library has been a temporary library for a period of time as well. So we would hope to see those numbers significantly increase as well.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Victor and Margie.
Hi, Rebecca.
I'll just say something. It's very important. I was in hospital on suicide watch for 16 hours about a council issue, and it's about an issue where somebody wanted to rip up the green space on my opposite me, and I fought it alone. For 2.5 years, I'm on disability living allowance, and for 4 months I've been running around, and the sculptures are all out there at the moment, and I'm going to, anyone that wants a full explanation, the reason I'm here, because the funding was, the funding that was given was purely down to my input, and a meeting is going to be held on the 29th, and the council have not cleaned that site for 4 months, and I have cleaned it myself every day,
okay.
And it hasn't been cleaned properly for 20 days, for 20 years, and there has been obstruction from a whole range of departments because they didn't want me to bring it up over there, and I'm just saying that now.
Okay, sir,
and
thank
if
you
that
very much.
meeting isn't stopped immediately, and I've given Darren stuff to give to you, where I've told the mediator...
Okay, sir, I'm going to ask you to stop now, and I'm happy to talk to you. Oh, you're going to go now?
Well, yes, I need somebody, because I've come in here about 50 times, and I've been beaten up and everything else, and I need one person, just one person to help me here, because out of 8 billion people on this planet, I've been dealing with this alone, and all I wanted to do was to put some fantastic history boards up on that site, and it would have cost a few bob, and it's cost a massive amount, and I'm sorry to go you.
No, that's okay, no problem.
I must stop that meeting.
Did you say that you
stop that meeting?
Did you say that you've left your details with Rebecca's ward colleague?
Yeah, so can someone help me please later?
If you're staying around, I'm happy to talk to you in the break of this meeting.
I'm sorry to do this.
Not a problem.
I mean, it's been absolutely horrendous on about 50 levels.
All
I'm
right.
sorry.
Stephen.
I apologise to everyone here, but I didn't want to.
That's okay.
Stephen, obviously Darren and Martin have been in touch with you about it, so if you've spoken to Darren already,
Yeah,
let me speak to him after this,
but
and we'll
everyone
be in
says
touch
they
with
can't
you.
stop the meeting.
Don't worry. Well,
That's all right.
let me pick it up with you,
No
with
problem.
with Darren afterwards, and then we'll speak to you.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.
Sorry about that.
No worries. You're all right. You're fine. Sorry about that. We were mid-flow in a question
Don't worry,
somewhere.
Steve.
We were mid-flow in a question.
Thanks, Chair.
Sure,
It was my chair, yeah.
Apologies.
So I want to ask you, the last time you came to OSC was around the budget, and at the budget we discussed the planned closure of our libraries 1 day a week. You know, we raised concerns at that point. I'm really pleased and encouraged to hear you saying that our libraries are really well used. You know, we know that they are, you know, those vital spaces where people come together and they rely on. So my question is, you know, knowing that what we know now, and presumably we knew this before the budget was set, why was it proposed to cut, you know, our library service down? And where did, you know, how was that decision able to be reversed so quickly once some political pressure was put on it? The other thing is to pick up on another aspect of the budget scrutiny meeting was we raised the fact that it's very important that we're promoting our local theatres. Really encouraged to hear that you mentioned that in what you just said. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about how you're going to use the free theatre visits for children to actually support Southwark theatres.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So taking your question about libraries first, obviously every single department across the council was tasked with finding savings to be able to achieve the amount of money across the council that we needed to be able to save to make our budget balance for the year. And as part of that, we took the difficult decision to consider reducing library hours. That was obviously put in alongside every other cabinet member's decisions and was seen as a way that we could make the decision to make the budget balance. Obviously, I then came here and spoke to you, and we went out to more of a public consultation, and people came back to us and talked more and more about the importance of libraries. The money that we have ring-fenced from libraries is not coming from the Environment and Leisure budget. So it's not a decision that I was able to reverse on my own as a cabinet member based on the conversations that I had about this decision. The money comes from some London devolution deal funding and some from business rates pooled money that was allocated back to me from the cabinet member for finance, and is a pool of money that sits centrally, and we had to decide how to spend it, and it was seen that this was an important thing that we should continue to do in the way we were doing it, so that money has been allocated back to the department specifically for libraries.
But knowing what we do about how valuable libraries are to our communities, you know, why was that decision made then, after that process, and not previously, when actually you've recognised already that libraries are vital sort of hubs in communities and, you know, places where lots of vulnerable people rely on. So why did it suddenly become a priority?
It didn't suddenly become a priority at all. We looked very carefully at how if we were to reduce library hours, we could still maintain the levels of service that we wanted to across all our library sites. And as we talked about when I came to budget scrutiny, we were trying to ensure that every single library would have a library next to it that was open on the day on which a library was closed, so that people were still able to access libraries in the way that they were. I think, you know, to Councillor Flynn's point, there are other boroughs who are having to not even reduce hours but shut libraries, and we are trying to do everything we can to make sure that we can keep libraries open when they're needed. And what we realised from that process was that if we were able to access more funding, we could keep the hours exactly as they were, rather than having to reduce them slightly to be able to try and make the savings that we were being asked to make across the department. And your point on theatres, so there are 19 theatres across Southwark that we really want to get involved in this programme. We want children to be able to access all of the great productions that go on in those theatres, and we're really keen that we can work with all of them. I've had hundreds of emails from theatres, not only across Southwark but all over the country, asking me if we can send our children to them, and we'll definitely be prioritising Southwark theatres to make sure that we can get our primary school children visiting them and interacting with them as soon as we can.
Great. I would like to ask another question around your role as equality and diversity champion. So, you know, Southwark is a borough that has a huge LGBT population. I think Southwark and Lambeth together are the highest concentration in the whole of the UK. So what are we doing as a council to promote LGBT spaces?
That's a very good question. I think part of it, do you mean in terms of council spaces or in terms of across the whole borough? So I guess, well, I'll answer it for you. So in terms of across the council, the best person to ask is probably Councillor Cryan, who kind of leads on workforce issues and can talk more about what the council's approach to some of that stuff is. But I think we want to make sure that we're seen as an open and friendly borough. We're doing a lot of work to push things like trying to ensure that we get better funding for PrEP, and we want to make sure that we are open for everyone to come to this borough, and we're doing everything that we can to make it a welcome place for people. But if there are specific things that you think we should be looking at, I'd be very happy to take them away and look into it.
I mean, I'm specifically thinking about safe spaces for LGBT people to come together. You know, we know that the nightlife is definitely one area where that actually happens in a big way.
Yeah.
And in Southwark over since 2016, there's been a 67% drop in LGBT spaces, according to the Mayor of London. So we know that they're under threat across London. You know, Southwark is no different from any other borough. But I'd be interested to know what the council is doing to promote those LGBT night spots.
So I think it's probably something that crosses a number of things, because we don't have any control over private developments that might be hosting such safe spaces or have that nightlife. But obviously culture is really, really important to us, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that we have a diverse range of cultural opportunities for everyone across the borough. But it's something I can take away and definitely look at and see exactly where it sits and how we can do more to promote those spaces and work with any developments that come forward or new cultural opportunities to make sure that we're factoring it in.
I think that's an excellent offer. I'd love to take you up on that. I think one thing that does spring to mind is the XXL night, which happens at Pulse in my ward. And I think with all the redevelopment that's happening either side of that's likely to close or to be moved on. I think I'd be grateful if you could look into that. You know, this is a valued place where LGBT people are able to come together. If it is closing, I'd be really interested. I believe there hasn't been an equalities impact assessment done. I wonder if that's something that you'd commit to going away and ensuring that the council, does before the closure happens.
Yeah, I agree. A follow-up to that is what are our links into those clubs, those pubs, and the promoters of those spaces, and how much work are we doing to enable them to stay within the borough if they have to relocate because of regen. And the club that you mentioned, the XXL club, moved from its original location, which is where Flatiron Square is now, to where it is currently 10 years ago, I think, but it is under threat again through redevelopment of all of that area around Blackfriars. So it's about what are we doing with club promoters.
I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So as far as I know, we're not doing anything specifically, but it's definitely something I can take away and we can look into doing. And if there are specific events or specific areas which you think are under threat and we need to make sure we're intervening and having those conversations, then by all means let me know. We can take that away and look at.
I'll write to you.
Thanks, Victor. Margie, then Jason.
Thank you. Rebecca, you mentioned the consultation process. Obviously, you will not be surprised. We all know our recent sort of dealings with the consultation process over the decision to charge for parking in parks has been quite problematic and has generated a tremendous backlash actually from my ward, and I think perhaps in some other wards as well. And frequently the comment is it's not so much the decision, but it's the way the process has been handled. You mentioned when you were speaking to start off with that sort of, you're looking at changes. Can you give a little bit more detail about how you would sort of proceed going forward with that?
So I think part of the issue with the car parking charges was that there was a misunderstanding that the IDM that was published was a decision, whereas essentially what the IDM that was published did was start a consultation process. It wasn't anybody making a decision at all, and we're obviously now at the point where the consultation started on the 1st of April and will run until the middle of May, and there has been no decision made as to whether or not we will definitely introduce car parking or in what form that will be introduced. In terms of the principles for consultation and engagement, what we have done is work very closely with the community over the past few months to have a co-design process for how we will approach consultation. And I don't want to give too much away because we will be taking it to Cabinet at the end of the month. It's not yet been published. But what we have set out is a high-level vision for what good consultation and engagement looks like, and then 10 principles by which we will hold ourselves to account for the way in which we will go about doing consultation engagement. And then that sits along other pieces of work like Councillor City's consultation charter that's for developers. and holds them to a standard. And I don't think it's fair for us to be asking developers to be held to a standard unless we're holding ourselves to that same standard going forward as well. I don't think it will change overnight in the way that our processes work. I think it's something that Kevin and I have been talking about how you embed it across the whole of the council, and how you make sure that every department goes about it in the same way. That obviously some departments that do much more consultation than others, and we'll need to do much more work with them to help them understand how they can adhere to the principles that we're going to set out.
Yeah, follow up.
Thank you very much, and we will look forward with bated breath to hearing how those improvements will show themselves. Thanks very much. I mean, I know that you take it seriously, but I thought it would be useful to highlight that. Another issue I remember talking about when we spoke previously was that of trees, and that you had discovered within your portfolio that we had rather more trees in the borough than originally thought. And actually, although it's a nice thing to have lots of trees, but actually something again which increasingly is coming back to me is within my ward is where trees, not necessarily even planned trees, but some unplanned trees, are causing damage. I mean, do you feel can you talk a little bit about sort of what you're doing to get on top of that process? Because I think the difficulty is for the council that ultimately this potentially it is something which has potential to create quite a considerable liability to the council, and there are a couple of cases in my ward where that clearly is potentially the case, and it's something that we need to be really on top of.
So as part of the budget process, we were allocated some further money to go directly to support the trees team, so that we can get back on top of the issues that we know that there are. If there are specific trees you're worried about, if you email me and let me know, we can look into those. But we do know of a huge number across the borough that we are currently dealing with, and we are, the money has gone into that team to make sure that we can keep pace with the works that we need to do going forward as well. But yeah, I know you and I spoke about one recently that I hope has now been looked into, but if there are other ones, do let me know.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jason, then Eleanor.
Thank you. As a fellow tree enthusiast, I also have a question relating to trees, and that is we've seen a number of trees being cut down across the borough, and I was just wondering how the council was going about communicating decisions that had been made to cut down trees with two residents. Was my first question. I'll answer my second question, which relates to relationships with faith communities. As you know, a large number of perpetrators of youth violence have strong connections with various faith communities, and I was wondering what work you and your team are doing in ensuring that faith communities are not only educating those who could be potential perpetrators or are potential perpetrators, and what type of work that they are able to do with the council in order to make sure that their communities are much more resilient and assisting you in ensuring that youth violence remains as low as possible.
So on your, I'll first start with the faith communities point. Obviously, youth violence in the main sits with Evelyn, but you're exactly right that there is a huge and really important role for our faith communities to play in helping us to tackle the problem. One of the things that Evelyn and I have been working on together is trying to host an event later in the year that will bring together young people from across the borough and get them to come and meet with other young people who have been in gangs or been subject to violence in some way, and talk to them about their experiences and how they might approach things differently, or how they can get out of the situations that they're in, but also celebrate the brilliant young people that we have in our borough as well. But youth violence is definitely one of the things that we also then want to talk to with the faith communities when we bring them together in September. And so we did a piece of work, Bill was involved in the piece of work I think that we did with BME communities. He's looking at me blankly, which we did through Health Scrutiny, that was talking about health services within being communities, and we did a really successful piece of work working with faith leaders to help educate them about educating their communities about mental health challenges. And I think we would like to take the same approach in talking about some of these issues that have come up with things like youth violence and how they can communicate with their congregations to help us solve some of the challenges that we've got. And on your point about trees, signs are put up on trees when they are due to be cut down. When I get for notice of it, I tend to send information straight to ward councillors, and ward councillors should be informed in any case anyway that trees are being cut down if they have to be. We don't cut down trees unnecessarily. We will only do it if there is a real reason to. Of course, we can't necessarily control developers or areas where trees have already been agreed to cut down as part of a planning application, but not for council trees. That is the process by which we go about doing it.
So they're private trees and they're council trees?
Yes. Yeah. So we don't have every tree. Obviously, any that are within development sites might come under different. I think you'd ask what numbers they were, which is why I was looking at Rebecca to tell me how many private trees we have compared to public trees. I think that would increase our numbers even more, and then Margie might get upset that we definitely won't be able to keep on top of our tree problem.
The more the better. It's just they have to not push houses down at the same time.
Yes, exactly. So we can only control a certain number of our trees in the first place.
Well, more council land for more council trees. Eleanor, and then Peter.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Rebecca. Great to hear that the new Woolworths Library and Heritage Centre will be opening at the end of the year. I wondered if you could talk about how the heritage aspect of that will work. So I struggle a little bit to sort of think, is it like a museum or an exhibition space or an event space or all of those? And I suppose a broader question, if I can, as council heritage champion, what's the sort of broader heritage strategy across Southwark, was most historic borough, and how are we kind of protecting and celebrating our history?
Thanks, Eleanor. So on your first point, there is a consultation about to go live, if it hasn't already. It's literally about to go, which is asking for community input into what the Heritage Centre at the Woolworths Library should look like. So I would really appreciate your thoughts on what we want there. But there's obviously a huge amount of things that we already have, so parts of the Cumin collection that are obviously in storage or already kind of on tour around the borough, but we want to make the Library and Heritage Centre not just about Woolworth. We want to make it a heritage centre for the whole of Southwark, so we want to talk about what other history we should be bringing to that space. So it's things like the borough art collection. Are there interesting pieces in there that we should be taking out and we should be using to tell the history of Southwark overall? And I think that links in more widely to what our approach should be to heritage going forward. So I've been doing some work with Aileen, who's one of the officers in the Environment and Leisure team, looking at how we can take our heritage out to the community rather than relying on the community to come to our heritage spaces. Because I think there are many great things like the work that South London Galleries have done on the So Gardens estate, where they've taken bits of art and community engagement out to the community. And I think we have such a rich heritage in Southwark and a lot of things that we should be doing much more to take that out to people, not only in schools, but also to our estates, to our other buildings, to anywhere, to developers that we can partner with to use in their public spaces, to try and get people engaged and understanding as much about the heritage of Southwark as they can. But if you've got any thoughts, I'd be really grateful to hear them as well.
Thank you very much, Alan. Peter and John.
Hi, Rebecca. As you kind of opened with, you have quite a broad brief, and there were a number of areas of your portfolio that I highlighted where you've spoken. I think you've touched on one of them maybe, but not too much on others. So if I could just run through and you can maybe tell us a little bit more around what you're doing there. The first is just some of the broader ones, and we're talking about improving the council's engagement with all Southwark's communities, especially those hardest to reach. I was particularly interested in the hardest to reach part of that. Strengthening the voluntary and community sector. You talked a bit about the grants, but I think there's maybe some wider activity you could touch on. And then just 3 specific areas highlighted. The Southwark Diversity Standard. If you could let us know what Peg says on that. Youth centres, to the extent it kind of falls on your brief, particularly in the context of rising youth violence, would be quite interesting to hear what's happening there. And then just the kind of, and then I just wanted to be a bit clear on the equalities part of your equalities and equal opportunities, so what you're doing on that front.
Okay, so I'll take those probably in order, but we'll see. So in terms of community engagement, that obviously, that kind of engaging hard to reach communities, that was your first question, right?
Yeah.
Part of that fits into the principles for consultation and engagement. So part of what we've been looking at is making it very clear that we cannot just go out and speak to the same people that we always talk to and engage with the same people that we always engage with. We want to make sure that consultation that's done by the council is done as widely as possible. And there's a specific principle in there that talks about the council needing to go out and engage and find innovative ways to engage with hard to reach community groups. We obviously also do a lot of work with Community Southwark, and we have a contract with Community Southwark who help us to access those communities, but also do a lot of the work that we do with the voluntary sector as well. And I think we need to do even more with the voluntary sector as much as we can. We obviously have a huge amount of grants and support that we give the voluntary sector at the moment, and Community Southwark do a great job of holding a number of those relationships, but I'm really keen that the council also holds those relationships, not just arm's length through Community Southwark going forward. I think it's particularly important that we celebrate the work of the voluntary sector as much as we can, especially whilst we're having to cut budgets and rely on them even more to deliver on the services that we need across the borough. And I think that links quite nicely to your question about youth centres, because we're having to rely more and more on voluntary groups to be able to provide the services that we would once have been able to provide in our youth centres. But obviously we have made a commitment through the council plan to reopen the Blue Youth Centre, and the expression of interest will be going out in the next couple of weeks on that for us to look for a model that means we can bring that youth centre back into use as well. And we're currently doing some work on the Brandon estate to look at the suite of services that are offered there and how we can best find a sustainable way that we can make sure that particularly that community that's been really affected by youth violence has a really clear youth services offer going forward as well. In terms of the diversity standard and also the kind of equality standard, it's something that we've kind of done the work on the principles. We think this is something that sits alongside those. It's kind of a suite of things and principles under which the council should operate. So we obviously had a diversity standard that was introduced in the last administration, and only 80 organisations ever signed up to it. And I think that we were never quite clear what the purpose of it was and what we were asking organisations to do, or what the ramifications were if they didn't sign up to it. So what I want to do is go back and look at that and try and rewrite something that has meaning, and that organisations want to sign up to because they see some benefit from signing up to it, and we as a council see that there's some value in having it in the first place. And I think alongside that then sits an equality standard that would do the same thing, so that we can really make sure that our community and the businesses and community groups that operate across the borough are kind of bought into our vision of what we think good looks like, and offering the best opportunities for everybody.
Okay. Can I ask one follow-up?
Yes.
Thanks, that was really helpful to get that overview. Just on the community engagement with those that are hardest to reach, I suppose the thinking would be that those are kind of currently people who are kind of unlikely to respond to lots of consultations that we do, but also that even with improved consultation, we're likely to, the hardest to reach are still likely to be a struggle. So just be interesting to kind of understand what broader outreach we're doing to engage those communities beyond a lack of improvement in how we do consultations.
So there's probably two useful examples I can give you. So the first one is we're obviously just starting work on the Walworth Town Hall, and we have been very clear with General Projects who are taking that forward that we want them to go out and engage with all of the estates, all of the schools, all of the people who actually live within that vicinity. So we have tasked them to go out and speak to those groups. We've suggested a number of people that we want them to engage with. And then in the case of the Brandon, that's probably the useful one to talk about. So the young advisors are actually going out knocking door to door to engage everybody on that estate. So it isn't just relying on, there's a website, please go to it and put in your thoughts. It's very much going out, speaking to individuals, engaging them in their homes and getting from them what they want. And I think one of the other things, without being able to speak about it in too much detail, is some of the ideas that we have around what the future of community councils would look like would be ways to bring a much broader scope of the community together to get their input into our priorities for the borough as well.
Thank you very much. John and Laura.
I don't have a question on community councils, but I would like to say how much I'm looking forward to meeting a wider section of the community at those kinds of meetings.
So say we all.
Not quite in the same vein, but following on, taking back to car parking in parks, even when we're talking about the same park, I've not experienced the same level of controversy that Margie has with her residents from residents in my area now. I mean, my residents on average are both younger and less wealthy, both factors which make it more likely that you'd be walking to the local park, but sadly also factors that make it less likely you'll be engaging with a consultation. So in terms of any changes that might be coming forward in the car park proposals, and it's something I think that would be good to see it succeed, but can I check that any proposals that are coming forward are going to be universally applied across the park, so we're not going to have special schemes for individual areas?
I don't think that's a proposal at all. No, I think it would complicate things massively further if we tried to introduce different rules across all of our parks. So I'd like to think that we will be introducing the same systems going forward. Obviously, I have had a lot of communication from Margie's ward, but then it's also true that I've had a lot of communication from all of the other parks across the borough as well, and there are a number of themes that are coming out for things that we should consider around people who use our parks for health, people who use it for dog walking, and people who use it to be able to transport their children to the park, to be able to use the facilities rather than having to walk a long distance, which would preclude them from being able to go as often.
Yes, and I mean, obviously mobility's got to be the priority there, but I mean, I hope that the scheme that you come up with is soft enough that we're able to successfully start that scheme, because it seems a useful change, particularly given so many of our residents actually walk to the parks, and of course, as you've highlighted, with that short on funding. In terms of funding proposals, I mean, I'm a great supporter in principle of the idea of festivals and paid activities in our parks. That has been slightly challenged by the process of Gala in Peckham Rye over the last couple of years, partly because it was an unusual site, partly because the process didn't work brilliantly and clear up in the first year. So you've been in those meetings with the promoters, and that has been incredibly helpful to have the council, the promoters, the local councils, and indeed concerned residents about it. But I think there's been unexpected benefits there. So, for instance, at the licensing meeting for Gala had a number of people from the local area who wrote in support, which is pretty unusual. And I doubt that would have happened without the contacts they made through that consultation process. So there's actually benefits for the people that we normally think of as the villain in this process. But my question for you and for the council is: have we learned lessons about the way that we are effective in partnering with these organisations, so that we do make the money for the council, but also so that we're returning the parks to what the regular everyday users are expecting?
Yes, so I think that the process, I obviously only saw the tail end of the process with Gala last year, but I think the process that we've gone through this year has been much more robust. I think there has been a much better effort to communicate with people, and I think it's testament to what they've done that they managed to get people to write in support for licensing. Obviously, the report that we wrote last year highlighted areas such as making sure that we had a better agreement with them about how to clear up the park. So now, rather than it being that they have to essentially subcontract to do it, that work will just be done by Ida Verdi as part of the council, so it should be much quicker to be able to put the park back to a condition that it needs to go back to. And hopefully we can learn some of the lessons from things like the parking points where people need to be picked up, and some of the routes that people took, and learn